You made my day. I had an opportunity to work with a lot of great people, and the Starbucks brand was just so perfect for digital and Howard Schultz's leadership. So he mapped out how we thought this could go. We knew that we needed global payment and global loyalty and connect all those systems together. And we created this flywheel, not thinking about this as something that we wanted to bolt on, but actually thinking about like, how do you build something amazing that feels on brand? I wanted to be a primary parent, and I lived that. And I personally did a lot of stuff at home with regard to being a parent that made me very tired at work the next day. I'm going to purposely craft my career to be work from home primary parent. When that little flame of fulfillment goes out, like, I just need to leave. I always tell Addie, 3 golden rules are: be a good listener, be a good learner, and be a good friend.
We prioritize social emotional skills over core curriculum every single day.
Welcome to CEOs and ABCs, real stories from execs who lead at work and show up at home. Career moves, parenting wins and fails, and everything in between. I'm your host, Kevin Rice. Here's today's episode.
Welcome back to CEOs and ABCs. My guest today is Adam Brotman, a renowned digital innovator and CEO. Adam helped architect Starbucks' digital transformation, later stepped in as co-CEO of J.Crew, co-founded Brightloom, a restaurant tech company, and is now building Forum 3, while also authoring his first book, AI First. Over a career that spans founding Play Networks to leading at global brands, he's earned a reputation for marrying customer obsession with business rigor and for turning big, messy transformations into simple, on-brand experiences. But what makes Adam's story even more compelling is the human side, choosing to be a primary parent, setting real boundaries, and redefining success beyond the office. Today, we'll talk about taking ownership as a leader, the cost of burnout, how to be truly present at home and at work, and how to prepare our kids for an AI native future. My guest today is Adam Brotman. Adam, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Kevin.
Adam, you've had an incredible career, and I actually wanted to start out by saying the work you did in digital transformation at Starbucks really created a wave in the industry that my company rode all the way through till the time we exited. So I don't know if you had any idea, but the work you did to completely rebuild Starbucks as a digital first company actually had so much cascading effects into other restaurants, as well as companies that provided services to restaurants like mine. So I just want to start out by saying thank you. I don't think my company would have been what it was had you not proved the value of digital through your work at Starbucks.
It made my day. It's really nice of you to say that. I have to say though that I just had an opportunity to work with a lot of great people. So it was a team effort, and the Starbucks brand was just so perfect for digital and Howard Schultz's leadership. So I appreciate you saying that, but I want to deflect the credit to the team and to the brand.
As most great leaders will, what was that experience like for you? I think a lot of us experienced how the digital loyalty experience and ultimately online ordering and mobile payments fundamentally changed the way that consumers interacted with the brand and catapulted the brand. What was the feeling of building something new that we on the outside as customers wouldn't have gotten to experience?
Well, interestingly enough, Starbucks was our first and biggest customer at Play Network, the digital music company. So we got Starbucks as a customer, and that was an incredible propellant, as you can imagine, as an anchor tenant customer to Play Network success. Howard Head Schultz was effectively the founder of Starbucks as we know it today, and the CEO of Starbucks during its meteoric rise. And then he left for a bit as CEO and came back in the depth of the financial crisis of 2000. And I was lucky enough to be hired into Starbucks with this mandate of help us build and execute a digital strategy under his leadership. It's coincidental that I left to go to J.Crew from Starbucks. It was right almost at the exact time that Howard left and handed the reins over to another CEO. And so I was there for that 9-year period that Howard kind of came back as CEO. And I'll tell you that his leadership absolutely was key to what was happening in the building when it came to the success of digital, even though he'll be the first to say he's not a digital strategist or a technologist in any way, shape, or form, but because he would drive, every aspect of what anybody there that was a leader would do was absolutely focus on what the mission of the company was in terms of taking care of the customer experience, and elevating the brand at all times and having to make sure everything we did effectively created a better relationship with the customer. For example, he would sort of set the tone. And then one time he asked me in his office, like, what surprised you about being at Starbucks maybe a year in? I said, Howard, everyone will take my meeting. It's incredible. Which is interesting because I'm not in sales. I'm in strategy and I'm in a new function called digital. But what it allowed me to do is go to Silicon Valley and learn. I credit Howard for really sort of pointing to the North Star of what it meant to build amazing experiences and things as a Starbucks leader. And then I just applied it to digital and had the power of the brand behind me. So it could open doors and I could go meet people in Silicon Valley and learn from them and get access to people that I would never have access to. And then I just really tried to also follow his lead about learning the business, something that my uncle Jeff, who ironically was on the board of Starbucks and an early investor in Starbucks early in the days. So it's funny how all these things kind of line up.
Your uncle Jeff did very well for himself.
He did. He was amazing. And so Jeff and Howard, these two mentors in my life, it was absolutely important that you understand. They would talk about know the business, understand the business, and what makes the business tick. And so, what was happening inside of Starbucks with me and the entire digital team that I surrounded myself with is that we really understood what made Starbucks, and then we understood the magic of digital and technology. And we just started architecting experiences and thinking about dots to connect, and we just started building it. And we had a lot of forethought about it. And we mapped out how we thought this could go with Starbucks digital ordering and mobile order and pay being sort of the cherry on top, the critical thing that it would culminate in. But we knew that we needed to do mobile payment and mobile loyalty and connect all those systems together and get a lot of customers sort of used to being on our ecosystem. And then at some point, connect that to the stores and the store experience and just go for it when it came to mobile order and pay. And we created this flywheel, and we were aware that we were doing that, but it was started with the leadership of Howard and the brand. I'm serious, and really not thinking about this as something that we wanted to bolt on, but actually thinking about how do you build something amazing that feels on brand as you're doing it?
Yeah, your flywheel at Starbucks was actually really inspirational for me. I'm writing a book right now on taking corporate lessons and business frameworks and how to apply them into family life and parenting. And so your flywheel was on the surface about creating transactions, but underneath it, it was really about creating connection. And so I took that parallel and I applied it to creating connection with your kids. And so my flywheel is called Spark Flywheel. And it starts with S, which is creating safety, P, which is offering your presence, A, which is attuning to your kids, R, which is creating rituals, and C, which is all about celebrating. And this has a compounding effect, much like the Starbucks example, where each step builds and ultimately creates a self propelling flywheel for creating connection. What's also really interesting is how you started your career. So I was looking through your resume, and you actually started as an attorney.
Yes.
What made you go into law, and then what prompted the transition into founding Play Networks?
So my late uncle, my dad's brother, Jeff Brotman, who was also a mentor to me my whole life, he was an attorney, and he's sort of famously known for being the founder of Costco, the co-founder of Costco. He's actually the one that came up with the concept and then brought on Jim Senegal and has been just an incredible success. And I always looked up to him and my dad. And Jeff Brotman, my uncle, was a lawyer, and he was telling me my whole childhood when I was already saying I wanted to be a business leader, following in my family's footsteps. And he would say, well, the best way to do that is not to go to business school, but to be a lawyer. And because if you become a business lawyer, you get to rub elbows with leaders and be in boardrooms and be in situations at a young age to learn business in a way that you would not get access if you were just a young non-lawyer. And so he encouraged me to go to law school, and encouraged is with a capital E. But I was like, great. And I went to University of Washington Law School. The whole time I was in law school, though, I was doing well. By the way, I flourished in law school, better than I'd ever done in any of my academic career before. And yet I kept finding myself sort of confused. I don't really want to be a lawyer. I want to be a business person, or I wanted to be an author or a teacher or something. And he kept saying,
And
no,
now
no, no.
you are an author.
Yes, I am. And it's funny because he would have said, and it's true, that what I was thinking about was the creativity that comes from business and entrepreneurship and building companies. But he kept me on the straight and narrow and said, no, this is the way you should start your career. And so I went to law school and I did well, and then I became a lawyer. Funny story, one time I accepted the first job offer that was made to me and my friend Joe, who was my classmate. We did really well. We were sort of like the two musketeers, and we got this job offer to be litigators. And it was like this big salary, and we got this job offer after our first year. And I was like, okay, I'll take it. And my uncle Jeff was like, you're going to go back in and unaccept that, because that's not the plan. You're supposed to be a business lawyer, not a litigator. And I sort of put my tail between my legs and kept going and became a business lawyer for about a year and a half. And then I remember specifically one day being up on literally the 59th floor of the Columbia Tower in Seattle, looking down this beautiful view, pushing papers on my desk and thinking, like, why am I here doing stuff for other people when I could be building things and creating things and following my passion? And one of my clients, or potential clients, he never ended up becoming my client, working on a digital technology project using digital music. And I was so enthralled that I helped him write the business plan. And next thing I know, I was going to my uncle again and my dad saying, I'm going to quit my law practice and start this company. And they were very frustrated with me, but I did it anyways. And that was sort of how I went from why I became a lawyer, but how I got out of being a lawyer.
When I was starting my company, it was pretty much straight out of college. And people always ask me, like, what gave you the confidence to start a company? And at the time, there was no risk, right? I didn't have anything to lose. And so it was a lot of not just being naive about what it takes to start a business. So we might as well try. What gave you the confidence to start a business?
I think similarly, I didn't know any better. Like you said, I didn't know how hard it would be. I learned really quickly. I didn't know what I didn't know in that sense. I was living in an apartment with a cat, and and it was like, okay, let's give this a go. And I do remember specifically, I think a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to this. After quitting my law practice and putting, trying to raise money from angel investors and maxing out credit cards to help the company and doing all the things you do as a first time 20-something-year-old entrepreneur. And I remember just like putting my head in my hands, just going like, what did I do? What did I sign up for? And, got through it. And ultimately, I wouldn't change it for anything. Everything in my career became uh, sort of a stepping stone to the next thing and lessons learned. And it was all part of the journey.
Yeah. How do you think you grew as a leader through that period of building Play Networks? And you eventually left and then became the CEO of J.Crew and then into Starbucks. What was that leadership journey evolution like for you?
First of all, I had to learn how to be a leader as a 27-year-old raising venture capital, where by definition, everybody that worked for me and for us was older and more experienced than I was at what we were doing, which is great. So learning how to lead in that situation was definitely like being thrown into the deep end, because you just basically learn by like these mistakes you make. And nobody tells you you're making the mistake in the moment, because you're the CEO and your board might tell you that you're making a mistake, but that happens, once a quarter generally. So
Right.
most
They're
of the
not in the
time,
weeds with you.
yeah, it's a big trial and error experiment of at the time. And I think that's true. Think about AI now, like enforcement learning. It's like, if you do something right and you got the answer right in the training of the AI, like you get like plus points. And if you got it wrong, you get minus points. And I think that's how humans learn anything too. And I think as learning to lead happens that way as well. You sort of do it and realize like, oh, that didn't work very well. And in the moment as a leader, particularly as an entrepreneur, you're not thinking like leadership lessons. I'm learning leadership lessons. You're just trying to like survive and advance. And so it's only kind of unconsciously or later that you sort of realize, well, yeah, I'm a better leader because I ended up stubbing my toe and also doing some things right. And so that combination just sort of evolved into leadership. I wish it was more like profound and scientific than that, but I really think that's how it works. And I was lucky that I was in my late 20s and my leadership team was made up of people probably in their late 30s, call it mid to late 30s, when I was in my late 20s. And they were better, obviously. We hired them, sales, head of operations, head of technology. And so they were really good at what they did, and they had 10 years on me. And, they listened to me, and I paid attention to that. So one of the things that's remarkable now is like that I gained confidence in that I have a good enough sense of EQ that if I was kind of a clown, I was a clown certainly at times, but if I was a clown in general, then they would have not respected me. You can kind of feel that, right? And so I just sort of was vulnerable enough to sort of pay attention to where were they following me? Where were they pushing back? What was I learning? Play Network crafted me a lot as a leader. I was lucky also that I had some great mentors on my board. And we ended up actually bringing onto our board a guy named Lon Troxel, who was the CEO of one of our big competitors. And then he kind of retired from that. We brought him on our board. And then he was a great mentor for me in the moment. And so I learned leadership lessons from him. I learned, like I said, leadership lessons from my direct reports, like what not to do and what to do. And just, but really paying attention to kind of how people reacted to what I did. And I think that's how you learn.
Yeah, I'll tell a story of one of my biggest cringe moments that I learned a lot from, and then I want to hear if you have any kind of moments in your career where you made a mistake or you did something, and then that kind of helped you see a path to grow. And mine was early in building our agency before we focused in on restaurant technology. We were working with all kinds of brands. And our first Android app project, this was probably in 2011 or something like that, we were building for Bear Paint. And we were at the finish line, getting ready to deploy to the App Store. And we were on Skype call. So it was definitely a long time ago. We were on a Skype call, and I'm chatting to our developer, and I'm like, hey, these guys don't understand. And I just cringed to even say these words, but I texted him. I was like, just tell them how to do their jobs. And then, of course, he gets on and he starts screen sharing, and my words are just on the screen. And it was horrifying. Oh my goodness. Because I was exposed, right? So I, that's obviously not what I meant. What I meant was like help them understand what needs to happen to get this code launched. But in my brevity and obviously in my ego at the time, because our company was growing and I was still young, my ego was getting too big. My ego was exposed. And I learned so much about showing up the way that I want to show up and carefully articulating and communicating exactly what I mean, and speaking like more authentically from my heart, that I always look back on that moment and I will never forget the inflection point that that created for me. So that's my biggest cringe story. I'm curious if you had any moments in your early career that changed kind of how you look at leadership or how you performed as a leader.
Don't expect that your boss or your board or your shareholders, someone's going to come and rescue you. I remember at Play Network, for example, I remember sitting at my desk one time in the bust happened. So this would have been after, it's probably sometime in 2001 is my guess. 9/11 had happened, and the stock market crashed and venture capital was hard to come by. We had to like recapitalize our entire company. And all of myself and all of the angel investors that invested in Play Network at the time were just going to get massively diluted if they didn't step up in a pay to play round. I remember it was very humbling, and that's an understatement, because I just didn't, it was a moment where I was like, shoot, I really didn't understand this, and I didn't take the time to understand. And I just trusted my AC board, like as if they were somehow going to rescue me like a parent or something. And I remember learning a lesson in leadership at that moment, just feeling like I'd let my investors down, I'd let my team down, I'd let myself down. And it was a reminder of not to put myself in positions where I was just expecting someone else as a leader, both as a company leader overall, but also just as an individual leader within a company. I remember having that moment going like, no, that's not how this works. And you have to really own it. Ultimately, Play Network ended up succeeding in a sense. And I was able to see that through, and thank God that I had enough humility and I think connectivity to everyone around me that I stayed as the leader the entire time. And which is kind of remarkable, right? I mean, I could have gotten fired, maybe should have gotten fired.
Adam, when you were at Starbucks, you were leading this massive digital transformation, but at the same time, your family was transforming. If my math is correct, and I'm not exactly a math major, but I think your daughter was born while you were at Starbucks. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. We had Addison later in life, but thank God we did. And that's right. So at Starbucks, towards the tail end of my time there,
Yeah. So how did your world change when you became a father?
well, at first it's interesting. For those that are parents, you kind of know what I mean. Like it's all about like how much help can you get at home and how much are you helping out. And I wanted to be so connected to our daughter that I personally did a lot of stuff at home with regard to being a parent that made me very tired at work the next day. Like I really decided when we had Addison, like I wanted to be a primary parent and I lived that. And so at first it was less about, I didn't need to like change my travel schedule as much and my work and career ambitions as much. I was just like having to make sure like, okay, how tired am I willing to be the next day in terms of handling some of the, nighttime duties. And I felt like guilty almost if I was at work. Uh, and I wanted to be home, just physically holding Addison and playing with her and stuff. In that first year or year and a half or so, that's kind of what it's about in some senses, being physically connected. But then we left Starbucks when Addie was only a year and a half and moved to New York.
Hmm.
That was the beginning of where I'd say I realized, oh, I have a choice to make here. If I want to be a primary parent and really involved, I can't just be like on the road all the time, and I can't just be at work all the time. She started to talk and become a little toddler. I found myself wanting to be at home and really feeling like the stress of
Mm.
how do you do both? How do you be a primary parent and a primary leader at work? And, sort of went through that at J.Crew a bit as much as I could. But ultimately, I think the fact that I left Starbucks and I left J.Crew were not unrelated. I think when I left J.Crew and came back to the West Coast, I started doing some entrepreneurial stuff with Starbucks, but became kind of more of a free agent at that point. And then COVID hit and we had to work from home. But I was already starting in my sort of J.Crew time and in my post J.Crew time, starting to like realize like, wow, like this Zoom thing or, whatever video meeting platform you use, like is kind of amazing. Like you could actually work from home and still be like a relatively important player in the business world. And when I started to get that inkling, I just like almost like subconsciously leaned into it until recently where I just decided I'm going to purposely craft my career for a while to be work from home on primary parent day.
Yeah, it sounds like we were kind of on a similar timeline because I became a single parent full time with a infant and a toddler right around COVID. And while COVID was, a very tragic period for a lot of people, for me, it actually was a bit of a saving grace because my travel schedule was really impacted leading up to that. And when I became a single parent, I really didn't know how I would possibly do it while still performing the demanding responsibilities of my career. And
Right.
so
That's right.
having all of the airports and travel shut down and doing everything over Zoom kind of forced me and allowed me at the same time to be there, to be available, at least before and after work. I was obviously working very long hours. So at least I was there for mornings and evenings. I wasn't traveling. So it really was a bit of a saving grace for me.
Yeah, I agree. You had mentioned when we were talking before we were recording, I think this idea of like just by being with your kid doesn't mean you're present with your kid and stuff. And I think I still struggle with that. I think the thing I sort of beat myself up on every morning is like trying to be a better dad in the moment the next day than I was the prior day. I have a long way to go there. I mean, people will be like, "Oh, you're a great dad," and whatever, but I can be better. But I will say though, so this is an interesting story. When I was at J. Crew, I went from Starbucks to J. Crew, and this was in 2018, so a full 2 years before the pandemic. And Zoom was a thing. It was existed, which was,
Yeah.
it was incredible. And you remember at that time, Zoom was mostly being used by people, not for the video calling, even though it worked. Mostly because we were all used to that stupid Polygon conference calling stuff that we
Yeah.
all started. So the world had started to move even before the pandemic to like technology allowing for, I'll call it virtualness, but it was done through conference calling. And
Hmm.
Zoom was this way of like one click on your iPhone and you can do the conference, you can do a better version of a conference call. You didn't have to remember the passcode and all that stuff. And you guys remember that? Like, so
Oh,
it
yeah.
was, so then I remember in 2018, I left Starbucks and I was going to join J.Crew, and they said, "Oh, this is just sort of random." They said, "Well," I said, "I can't move my family." It was like March. I said, "I can't move my family until summer." Ironically, Addie was one. We could have totally moved before summer. It's not like she was in school. Like I know now, like you really can't. But I just said, "Well, I don't want to do it until summer." And they're like, "Fine. Why don't you basically be virtual-ish from, call it, March through May?" And I was like, "Great." And so I basically spent, I'd say, I went to New York like every other week for a couple of nights, something like that. And in the meantime, I was just doing all this stuff on Zoom, this incredible new thing called Zoom in my life. And I noticed that I could be working and I could still see what was going on with Addison. Even if I wasn't like holding her at the moment, I was there. And then as soon as I got off a call, I could be there to like spend a few minutes with her, bonding, going for a walk or whatever I was doing. And then I got into my rhythm of being a dad and being a worker through that time. And then I became kind of addicted to it, to be honest with you, of like, oh, I just want to be around her constantly and be there for her. But even if I'm working, which kind of works and kind of doesn't, but I think now a lot of us do that. But I was sort of an early adopter.
Yeah. You had mentioned, sometimes you beat yourself up over parenting and trying to be a better dad. And I think that's in some respects, like, no, you don't want to beat yourself up over it, but like in some respects, that's shows that you're being reflective and you do have the intention to continue to grow as a parent as well as in your career. Man, I dropped the ball. Like I have rules where I don't use my phone while I'm reading with my kids or building Legos, and I broke that rule last night, and my kid called me out on it. He had like 5 minutes left before bed. We'd been building Legos. I pulled out my phone. He was independently finishing a step, and I started like checking some emails. And when I told him it was time for bed, he had a major meltdown. And I was like, "Wait, like you already know it's time for bed. I told you 10 minutes ago it's time for bed. Why is this happening?" And I eventually got it out of him. He was like, "You wasted my last 5 minutes." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You were on your phone for my last 5 minutes." He called me out on it very well, and he knew I had broken my rule. And what he was really highlighting to me was energetically, I wasn't there for him. I wasn't present for him mentally, even though had I not been on my phone, he would have just continued doing what he was doing, finishing that step. But the difference was is I wasn't there connected with him, and so I had to repair and I had to apologize and be like, "You were right. I'm going to give you 5 minutes more." And so we built for 5 minutes. And then at the end of that, I told him it was time for bed. And he more than happily went to bed, no problems. So as much as I like have intentionality around being a good father, I still screw up all the time.
Yeah, no, I can 1,000% relate to that story. I've been called out by Addie many times, like, "Dad, get off your phone." And to your point, like, what difference does it make if I'm on my phone if we're together? And she's like, "Oh, because I'm not your only thing you're paying attention to," and they know that, and that's important. And yeah, I definitely don't get an A grade for that all the time. I don't.
It's we're growing. So I think what I took away from, because I took a bit of a career break after I had kind of gotten through the height of my career, sold the company, really experienced my own version of burnout, which was very much disconnection from myself and disconnection from my family. Taking that time off allowed me to realize that I needed to be even more intentional with my personal life than I did in my career, because I figured out how to be a good leader. I figured out how to build business. But when it came to parenting, I had no playbook. I had no mentors. I had no board to give me feedback or guidance or advice. And it meant that we need to put even more into that side of our life to, make a holistic life that feels meaningful and fulfilling. So I think we're all learning and we're all growing. You had earlier talked about coming to a decision point where you knew you needed to make a change. What was kind of building during that time for you where you realized, no, I really do want to be more present for my children or for my daughter?
I don't think I was as conscious of it or as intentional about it as I am now reflecting backwards. I think about that time at J. Crew. It was a bit of a chaotic for a number of reasons that are unrelated to the story. But during that time, I just found myself like wanting to just be home. If Addison, for example, was going to go do some like gymnastic activity or do something else, I was like, well, I want to be home when she gets back. So even before the pandemic, I found myself doing that more and sort of pushing the boundaries of like, what could I quote unquote get away with as a, president, C-suite, and eventually co-CEO of the company? How could I sort of balance the time at the office versus the time at home? So when I left J.Crew, I chose to do this project with Starbucks called Brightloom that uh, allowed me 100% to be virtual. The company was headquartered in San Francisco, but we were going to kind of turn it into a virtual company. That was the sign that I was like starting to exercise that muscle. And when I went into business with my business partner, Andy, and we formed Forum 3, and Andy's been amazing. But I was like, I'm going to lay down some boundaries and some ground rules. And those are, I can live where I want to live. I can work where I want to work. You'll get the classic Adam always on sort of guy to a fault. But I was intentional. And at that point, I realized like, I'm doing this because I don't want to go work for a big company and be, constantly at an office or on the road and have them control my schedule and whatnot. I want to control my own schedule. I want to control my own work style. And I'm doing that not because I'm being lazy. I'm doing it because I want to be around Addie as much as possible.
I think a lot of people are in that similar position where they might be in a comfortable career, but it might not be very like conducive with the life that they want to create. Do you have any sort of guidance or advice for people who are considering maybe leaving a comfortable job to go out and start something on their own?
It's kind of funny because it's related to the parenting thing we were just talking about, that, and related to the biggest leadership lessons, I guess, are just really, if you're going to do something like that, make sure you really got your arms around why you're doing it and what the trade-offs are. And I don't think a lot of us do that. I think you've mentioned a couple of times this concept of burnout, right? And I can relate to that. Like there have been times in my career, and I think that whenever I've left a company or a job, it's usually because I'm somehow burnt out on something.
What did that look like for you? Because it looks different for everybody. My burnout was I was still performing at a very high level professionally, but personally I was crumbling. So like what did your burnout look like?
To me, it's going to sound really weird. My burnout is like where my fulfillment well is empty. It's not about a typical burnout. By the way, and I suffer from typical burnout, like not enough sleep, or in those moments where you're like physically too stressed and not taking care of yourself and all that kind of stuff. I have plenty of that in my life and always have. But for me, when I say burnout, it's like the flame within me is burned out. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like it's a different way
absolutely.
to use that term, but it's like every time from leaving Play Network to leaving Corbis. I mean, I left Corbis in the middle of the financial crisis. In the middle of the financial crisis, I quit an incredibly high-paying job, and they were telling me, "Don't quit, please, don't leave. Like, what else can we do?" Same thing at Starbucks. When I left Starbucks, I sat down there like, "Please, don't leave. Like, what else can we do?" And I look back now and go like, what was I, crazy? Like in each case, there's an element of like, people would have said and did say like, "You're crazy." But like when that little flame, I don't know why I'm pointing to my like chest, but it's where it feels like it is. Like when that
Yeah.
little like flame of fulfillment,
Hmm.
like when it goes out, like I just need to leave. And
Yeah.
and I feel like that's what's happened at each time, as opposed to some other, like you said, some other external or physical or financial thing. It was always like something within me. And
I think
just like,
that's a great
you know what I mean?
indicator to share
The
with
flame
people.
just goes out. Yeah.
Like the fuel for that flame is you mentioned purpose and meaning. If you don't have those, the fire goes out. And that's probably a really
Yes.
good indicator for people to consider if they're in the right place.
Yes. But back to your question, Kevin, like my words of advice, since you asked me to give advice, my words of advice would be, and I'm speaking from someone who has not heeded this advice in my own life. So I'm saying this from a position of do what I say, not what I
Not
did,
what I did.
which is, when that happens, you tend to make it's sort of a psychic or emotional decision at that point, and it's not a logical or well thought through decision. It doesn't mean it's a wrong decision, because like follow your heart or follow, your,
Follow your gut. Yeah.
yeah. However, be aware when you're doing that, if that's what you're doing, that you might, not that you should not do it, but like be like, what am I not seeing? Even if I'm going to make this decision, because at that point, when the flame goes out, like Godspeed to anyone who tries to talk you out of it. Like at that point, like you're just like, I'm just gonna, whatever. And except you're not thinking about like the trade-offs, and you're not consciously thinking about those things. So I would really encourage people to be like, at least if you're going to leave a job or leave a comfortable situation to go do something that's either going to be more or your passion or more entrepreneurial or whatever, just, be aware that you might be doing it for that reason. And if you are, like, you need to sort of think about like, well, okay, well, what's going to change in terms of like things that I didn't think about, things that were comfortable, things that trade-offs that I wasn't thinking about, whether it be personal time with your family or yourself, or financial issues or psychological issues that you might go through that you're just not thinking of because you're just like, you can't be talked out of it. I mean, I'm thinking maybe that was just me, but I wish I could go back and in every case be like, well, if you really thought this through, not that you shouldn't do it, but like, let's maybe do it in a slightly different way, or at least be aware of certain things that you weren't aware
That's interesting you say it. Like the exact words you just use is maybe you should do it in a different way. Like I was at an event last week and I was talking to a founder and he's building his company for exit in the next few years. And he asked me, he was like, if you were to look back, would you have done anything differently? And that question and ultimately became a journaling prompt for me for like 3 nights because I really wanted to dig into it.
of.
And he was asking like, would you have worked? Because we were talking about family and sacrifice and, kind of the tax that being in a leadership position puts on you. And so he was asking like, would I have worked any less hard knowing
Mm,
that that hard work eventually got me to an acquisition? And I don't know that I would have worked any less hard. I think I would have been more intentional with my non-work time,
mm,
and I would have not let my work creep into my personal life as much as I mean, it completely took over my personal life. And so
mhm.
would I have worked any less hard? Probably not. But I would have just been really, really careful about the time that I wasn't working, before work, after work, weekends, and not letting, the next pitch meeting, the next client meeting be
Yeah.
driving my thoughts when I'm with my kids. So same question to you is, would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, no, I think the way you just said it was really, really well said, Kevin. I think in hindsight that what I would have done differently in almost every case would have been clear about boundaries that I'm either setting with myself or with others. I'm just now getting good at that in like my middle age. I would, it's something that I definitely would, and the boundaries might have been different in every case, right? Like now I'm clear what the boundaries are. But one example is that when I left Starbucks to go to J.Crew, and I've never shared this publicly, so I'll be careful what I say, but like, like I alluded to a second ago, that there was an element of chaos going on. And then I should have been clearer, even though I left the company and I left Starbucks and I started at J.Crew. When I encountered that chaos, it was not my chaos, but it became something I was a part of and involved in. I should have just been like, no, like this is not okay. And then the truth is, I should have been clear about that going into it. And I should have been clear about it in the middle of it. So when I left there and I went to this other thing, again, in the spirit of oversharing a little bit, I'll do it, is that uh, it happened again. And the funny thing is, I had actually said to myself and to the people I was working with, like, oh, I'm going to learn from that lesson. So I was clear about the boundaries, but I didn't live up to my own boundaries. Like, so in one case, I didn't set clear enough boundaries. In the other case, I was like, I'm going to learn that lesson and set these boundaries. And then when, kind of met chaos again in a different way that I sort of was unexpectedly sort of put into, I wasn't I wasn't clear to be like, no, this isn't going to work, right? Like, I eventually did, thanks to my business partner Andy, who's my closest friend and became my business partner and is my business partner now. It was great that I had him to bounce some of these things off of, and he was seeing what was going on and was like, "That's not cool, and you shouldn't have to accept that." So I slowly started to kind of get clear on that kind of stuff. But if I could go back in time and in definitely those two cases, I would have been much clearer about what are my boundaries and why do I have these boundaries, and what's okay and what's not okay and why. I would have been like really clear with myself. Forget about other people. I would have been really clear on, and I would have been able to like own it and live it and say it in a way that I'm better at now, but I wish I had been better earlier in my career.
Yeah. No, I mean, we've talked about expectations, we've talked about boundaries. These are things that are very present in our corporate careers and in our personal lives. We kind of went back into your career. I also want to look forward. You recently wrote and published a book called AI First.
Yes.
And, I was thinking your daughter's maybe 10 years out till she starts whatever career she goes into. And I can't think of anybody better to ask than, like, what do you think the world is going to look like when she starts her career?
That's the question I go to bed every night wondering. I would say very different, obviously. I mean, extremely different. And it always is the case from generation to generation. But I think that, I think that I think there's going to be like this desire or need for everybody, and somewhat of a desire for everyone to be much more entrepreneurial than they've ever been. And it doesn't necessarily mean starting businesses. I think the world is going to be a lot of individual contributor roles and companies. And today they call them like YouTubers or influencers or creators. I think that's a precursor to when you can create an entire company, when you can create whatever software you want. I think it will go on steroids. And in terms of for her, it's going to force a bunch of people to really think about like what kind of content do they want to create or what kind of things they want to create, not just content, like what kind of things
Sure.
do they want to create in the world. But it's not normally how you think about work. Like work, it's like, what's my job? And as opposed to like, what do you want to create? And I've always been lucky enough to get my career at a place where I always think of what I do as a creative exercise, being creative like an artist, but also being creating things like a generative builder of things. And so for me, it's fascinating and exciting. And I think it will be for Addie because she's like a little acorn that fell from my tree. But so I think she's going to be like, great, but who knows, right? And it's kind of scary because it's going to be a weird world where we have AIs everywhere and doing jobs and interacting with people in ways that are like science fiction. And so that's going to be the world she's going to be in for sure.
Yeah. In your book, there's a quote where you talk about speaking with Sam Altman and him telling you that the future, as it relates to the kind of business that you're in, is going to involve basically 90% of creative marketing activities being replaced by AI. But then you mentioned the question that you think about every night. The question I think about every night is, how do I prepare my kids for a world that I really can't fathom? That the jobs of today won't be around for tomorrow, but completely new careers will be. So, how do you prepare your kids today for what will be in the next 10 years?
Man, I don't know. I always tell Addie when I go to school, like the three golden rules are be a good listener, be a good learner, and be a good friend. I made that up when she went to
Love that.
preschool. And I was like, just follow those rules and they're going to serve you really well at school. And I think they'll serve her well in life, which is, those things, be curious, be a good learner, be a good friend, be kind to other people and be a good listener, like as in, follow a sense of social decorum and sensibilities. And I, I think if kids just sort of stick to those kinds of things, creativity and kindness and um, and learning that they'll be fine. I'm an optimist. So I don't, as opposed to like, oh, don't worry about computer science and study the humanities or like whatever. Like, I don't know. I think if you follow sort of higher order sort of rules, and guiding principles, you'll be okay.
Yeah, beautiful. No, I agree. I think I don't have a strong point of view on it yet either, but it's something I think about a lot and I journal about a lot. I think right now what I'm focusing on is family values or core values, which my values in my career are very similar to the values in my family, and then character development and behavioral development, like social emotional skill. My kids are homeschooled and we prioritize social emotional skills over core curriculum every single day. Reading, writing, arithmetic's important. Learning how to learn is probably more important. Adam, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate how candid you were about choosing to be a primary parent and setting real boundaries and recognizing when the flame goes out, and for connecting those lessons from your journey through Play Networks to Starbucks to J.Crew and now Forum 3. Your perspective on presence and repair and preparing our kids for an AI native future, where you mentioned being a good listener, a good learner, and a good friend, I think will really stick with me and our audience. It's been a real honor to have you on CEOs and ABCs. Thank you again for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
If you're enjoying this conversation, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. CEOs and ABCs is all about helping you grow in your career and show up at home. We've got many more amazing guests coming up, so tap follow and stay tuned.